Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. It's been a hot minute since my last video, but I'm back now with the first ever solo run I've done in the Mirror Dungeon 4. This Mirror Dungeon is one of the easiest to solo with, and to prove it, I've decided to try and solo it with every single identity in the game, starting with, in my opinion, one of the worst. Base Yi Song. The reason why this Mirror Dungeon is so much easier than the previous ones is because of one of the main strategies that enables you to actually do a successful solo run. Pathing. I haven't really talked about it in previous videos as it's generally just about avoiding difficult encounters. Most of the time when a run dies, it's because you are forced into an unfavorable elite fight, but with the new floor theme mechanic, it is far less likely to actually run into an unfavorable encounter. The hardest part about the new Mirror Dungeon is the starter ego gifts are far less useful, but the reduced number of enemies and less extreme enemy buffs makes it easy to work around. For these reasons, I believe any identity can solo this Mirror Dungeon no matter how bad they are. Which is why, as I've previously stated, I decided to do it with all of the identities, starting with Base Yi Song. The reason he's a bad identity is for one reason and one reason alone. His rolls are abysmal. With a max roll of 12, it means that not only is his clashing terrible, but also his damages, only being able to do around 60 damage against fatal enemies. Having reduced defense level also doesn't help, making him slightly frailer than normal, and his passive is completely useless when soloing. The one and only saving grace is that he inflicts sinking, which helps to supplement his poor clashing, if you can manage to actually inflict it. Yi Song doesn't have anything special going on for support passives. We have Base Gregor and Mersault, Vi Sinclair and Faust, and Chef Ryoshu for healing and damage reduction, Shidon, Rabbit Heathcliff, Butler Ishmael, and Base Rodion for absolutely necessary damage, and lastly G-Corp Otis for random support. The starting gifts we choose are Dreaming Electric Sheep and Resolution. Both of these serve the same purpose, giving us extra clash power that we desperately need. Without these, we would lose a lot more clashes, making the run infinitely more difficult. The first floor we choose is Automated Factory. It's one of the easiest floors with no threatening enemies whatsoever, and it offers us Grey Coat at the end. Getting Coffee and Cranes early on allows us to activate every passive within the first encounter and quickly get to the boss. Normally these robots are not even worth talking about, as most identities can defeat them multiple times before the skill check even shows up, but with how low Yi Song's damage is, it takes around 8 turns before we can even defeat them once. After that, we can defeat them easily with his low DPS, sort of benefiting us a little by having all of their HP low by the time they are vulnerable. The next floor we choose, the Unloving. Another pretty easy floor with very similar enemies to the last. At the shop we get an extra skill 3 as it's our best source of damage, as well as Bloody Gadget, Voodoo Doll, and Lithograph. We also pick up Phlebotomy Pack along the way before making it to the boss. This floor's boss is unique to say the least. Essentially, it's a pure DPS check. You need to kill all of the enemies within 4 turns or else you just lose. At a first glance, this might seem to be a problem since, as I keep saying, the damage we have is awful, but luckily, some of the enemies are actually fatal to sloth damage, which just so happens that our highest damaging attack is a sloth one. The first wave we do have a bit of a close call, dropping down to only 9 HP, but thanks to all of our healing support, we are able to return to near max HP within a single turn. Other than that, the fight's easy. Nothing to talk about, really.
쉽게 하지 않아요.
We pick up Red Order and choose our next floor, the Miracle on District 20. Abnormality bosses are always scary when you don't have an evade, so avoiding them as much as possible is always the best option. We fuse Grandeur and get Headless Portrait as well as Thorny Path from events to help out our sinking, easily making it to the boss. The boss is literally just a long regular fight. The enemies aren't a high enough level yet or have enough buffs to effectively beat our horrible clashing, so it's fairly easy.
생체 반응이 끊어진 대치 타입 같은 걸 시도해보았을지 모르겠네요.
We take standard duty battery for a little extra damage and are forced into choosing an abnormality boss this time, where we pick Dizzying Waves. At the shop, we pick up the best ego gift in the game, Painkillers. I sure do love drugs. We also pick up Special Contract from an event. This floor is another fairly easy one, so long as you aren't fatal to blunt damage. There are two specific things to say about this floor. First, it takes absolutely forever. K-Corp being the main enemies with how tanky they are, coupled with our terrible damage, means every fight takes around like 20 turns. Second, Wishing Cairn is the absolute MVP hard carry of this run. With it giving 3 blunt and sloth protection, it absolutely trivializes this floor by making us just as tanky as K-Corp. Fighting K-Corp with no damage, oh boy is it an experience, and one that I never want to do again. The boss of this floor is Papa Bongi. Not too difficult of an encounter. Good ego usage is more than enough to take out most of the head chickens, at which point we can focus down Bongi himself. I misplayed a little, allowing him to summon more chickens, but it ultimately didn't matter much as we took them out quickly after. All of the enemy buffs for this floor suck. Extra coin power, more HP, and less damage are never what you want to see when using a character like Yi Song. Ultimately, I had to choose the least impactful and just went with the HP. For the final floor, we run it back and choose Abnormal Seismic Zone, which is completely identical to the last floor, except the enemies are slightly stronger. At the shop, we take Late Bloomer's Tattoo, which helps with our clashing a little whenever we use Ego or a Skill 1, as well as Broken Compass. We take Illusory Hunt from an event, and then proceed to spend the next 30 minutes fighting K-Corp. At the final shop, we take Erdtree Snare and Rags. Finally, we fuse Artistic Sense and go into the final boss. Luckily, we didn't get Papa Bongi again, and instead have the Fairy Gentleman. He's a pretty good boss to solo, mostly because he doesn't have many skill slots, so his damage output is fairly low. For whatever reason, I decided that I wanted to activate every single Ego passive, so I ended up Ego spamming for most of the first half of the fight. I let myself get staggered multiple times by his Tremor Burst skill for absolutely no reason, but all of the Ego passives plus Painkillers means he literally cannot hurt me. This makes the fight slightly longer than it should be since he keeps healing, and despite the fact I have tons of damage modifiers, I still do very little.
혹사에 대한 대가구려. 시들어가는 것 같소.
And that's how I beat Mirror Dungeon 4 with only base E Song. I could not agree more with his victory quote. This run was more than an ordeal. It wasn't actually that difficult. With so many ego gifts boosting clash power and offense level, the low rolls weren't actually that bad. The real thing that made it miserable was the damage. Even with a 200% damage modifier, he still only did like 100 damage, which is awful. Most identities can do that with a single coin, let alone an entire skill. Either way, this Mirror Dungeon is incredibly easy to solo. You have to actively make bad decisions to fail. Anyways, like and subscribe and all that. I'll be doing a very special run at 500 subscribers, so look forward to that. Goodbye!